Hello and welcome to the Phil and Simon Show number 46. This is COVID-19 lockdown week 6, we think. My name is Simon Minty.
And my name is Phil Friend.
We've got a bumper show. Jeff is here with the news in a moment. We will have Disability Royalty with Judy Heumann from the USA.
Yeah, so without further ado, let's crack on. Jeff, busy week. What's going on out there that you need to share with us all?
Yes, we're coming at the same story again, but from a slightly different angle. This time it's a learning disability care provider called Turning Point. And Turning Point says it's received an unprecedented number of what it believes to be illegal do not resuscitate orders in relation to people with learning disabilities. This is reported in the Health Service Journal. And it says in the first 2 weeks of April, it received as many as it would normally receive in an entire year. And this is in spite of the fact that the Health Secretary and the NHS and everybody has said to everybody, look, somebody having a learning disability should not affect their right to be resuscitated or their right to receive treatment if they've got COVID-19. What Turning Point is saying is this is still going on and they're very worried about it.
Can I clarify, are these forms coming from the doctors on behalf of people with learning disabilities? So the people with the impairment are not actually involved in this?
They say, the Turning Point say the people are not involved and they are on behalf of people who lack mental capacity. So in other words, they're unable to advocate for themselves.
So there's an assumption being made without any consultation whatsoever. Learning disabled people seem to always get the short end of the stick when it comes to consultation.
I've seen medical documentaries, and I'm just going to put this in for a tiny percentage. There are some people with some conditions that if you do the DNR, you would actually cause them more difficulty, and it actually backfires. And not only if you keep them alive, they could have a very painful life afterwards. I just want to put that in for there will be a small number. Nevertheless, the bit that you're saying, they're getting more than they would get in a year, and these are arriving. What's going on?
Well, I think what's going on is that we're back to that medical model of assuming that people with a learning disability have a lesser quality of life than people who don't have a learning disability. And therefore, a value judgment is being placed on people, and that directly affects their chances of survival. And I think that's extremely worrying for a lot of people, actually.
The other thing, if you recall, our last podcast, we had Dr. Frances Dockery on, who talked about the process to some degree, not in great detail, but she did say that what was looked at was health considerations, not stuff like disability. Was this treatment going to help somebody rather than not? So that clearly isn't working. And the other thing that worries me, Jeff, is you're talking about what's going on in hospitals. I saw a BBC News feed which said that up to 2,000 people a week are dying in care homes, residential care settings. Now, we know that a lot of learning disabled people live in those kinds of settings. I'm not suggesting that number includes them, but the protections in care homes seems to be even less than that in hospital.
We did, didn't we? Last week, we talked about the letter from the directors of adult social services saying that what was going on in the community and in care facilities was a lot worse than what was going on in hospitals.
You just feel this. I feel like I'm being a scaremonger. I just feel there's going to be a scandal at the end of all of this. And I'm not normally one who says something like that. And we know it's lack of PPE. And we know this is, as you said, this is illegal, these DNRs, or they believe that they're illegal because people are making judgments. The problem with all of this isn't like the scenario is someone might have died. That's why it's so blooming awful. This is terrifying.
I know we get annoyed about the word vulnerable, don't we? And we try very hard not to be seen to be and all of that. But when you put a learning disabled person in a room where no one understands them and is able to communicate with them well, and they're being offered, I don't know what all, they are truly vulnerable. They can't exercise their own kind of autonomy. So
in your story, Jeff, they say they think it's illegal. Do you know if anything will happen, or is that as we've got to wait and see?
Well, what they're saying is in the normal run of events, they would make a legal challenge. But of course, COVID-19 is no respecter of legal timetables. Things happen very fast, don't they?
I think you're right, Simon. It might well be that when all this calms down, there'll be all sorts of stories and litigation going on What's next, Jeff? What have you got that's perhaps a little less scary?
I can give you something much more positive. This is from The Guardian, and they say that the coronavirus pandemic has led to an unprecedented, although it's led to unprecedented restrictions on people, people with disabilities are finding that they're able to do virtual tours of places that have only opened up because of COVID-19. And we're talking about museums and galleries, for example, or the National Theatre or the Royal Opera House. One of the people interviewed says that they went to the Watts Gallery in Surrey. They then followed that with a trip to the Louvre in Paris, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and all of this was done by a walkthrough on Instagram. So what this article is saying is that disabled people, some of whom are restricted to not going out or not making big trips to places like Amsterdam and Paris, suddenly the world is opened up to them in a way that it wasn't before.
Fantastic.
Can we just say congratulations on your French accent when you said the Louvre? I like that very much, Jeff. It's a beautiful little drop in. This is very exciting. I'm going to a comedy show tonight online. So what we're kind of saying is you can do this. Has it got greater? Is the story saying suddenly all these places have opened up or is this already in the background?
It's saying that because they don't have visitors, they have increased their virtual visiting capacity. In other words, they've put virtual tours on things like Instagram so that you can do a walkthrough in a way that you couldn't do before COVID-19.
I love this. I'm linking it to a colleague who was telling me that he's got a disability and he's been repeatedly asking over many years to be allowed to work from home, and they've refused him every time. Now he's working from home. Isn't it funny how we can do stuff when it really matters?
This is our moment. It also reminds me of when Phil and I used to do training, and certain venues would say, "We're really sorry, we're inaccessible." And we'd say, "Well, then come up with some other way that we can get to the Whispering Gallery of St Paul's Cathedral," and they would make films of it. But it seems like this is becoming mainstream. But obviously, we're really benefiting. That is super.
I did do a virtual tour at Warwick Castle once, many years ago, where I sat in a room and watched a video, and I got a chocolate biscuit and a cup of tea. So all that's missing from your story, yes, it's the cup of tea and the biscuit. But it's brilliant. I love that. It's great.
I think you have to supply that yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got another very positive story for you. This is workers at a disability firm in Devon. It's called the Devon Disability Collective, and they're supplying very much needed PPE for the local NHS. Staff at the enterprise normally make things like wheelchair upholstery, and they've switched to producing thousands of masks and shields for the local NHS.
I like this.
This is good.
Was this
is good.
One of our early shows? Did we talk? Is it Philip Connolly? You both know him.
Yep. Philip Connolly.
His big presentation about how can disabled people be part of the solution rather than just seen as an issue. This is what they're doing. They're getting involved, and that's amazing.
It's one of those things that's probably replicated all over the country, isn't it? You've got very small firms. Okay, they can't provide the millions of items, but 10,000 here and 4,000 there all adds up to something for people who are desperately short of this stuff.
And presumably, for those who are making these things, it adds real value and purpose to what they're doing, doesn't it? I mean, what they're doing is vital, actually.
I have a very good friend called Pat. She is a short woman. She used to be a clothes buyer for people like BHS and House of Fraser. She makes all my alterations, all my clothes, because she understands the small body, as it were. Now, she's been sewing up all these gowns for the NHS at home. She's retired now, so she's knocking them out. She said, I ran out of material. Her husband, Fred, suddenly came in with this bag because he'd kept all the remnants that she'd cut off of his. And now she's making these patchwork sort of stuff. And they roared with laughter, but it does show there's plenty of stuff that we can do.
People are being very inventive, aren't they? And that's great. The operations director at the Devon Disability Collective said the team all wanted to do their bit for the UK's response to the pandemic and to show that local manufacturing can play a part in fulfilling the increased demand for different products. I mean, that's great news. And moving on from that, I've got a story from it's from the Metro about adaptive yoga classes for disabled people. Now, I don't know how you guys feel, but I don't like going to classes where everybody's doing one thing and I can't quite do it. Maybe it's just something to do with me and being self-conscious. No, you get that as well.
Absolutely. Pilates, I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep up.
So when I do yoga, I do it one-to-one with a yoga teacher. Anyway, lockdown in full force. This organization is doing adaptive yoga it's basically for people sitting. So if you have a mobility impairment, you want to do yoga, but you can't stand, or you have difficulty standing for long periods, you can do these seated yoga classes.
That sounds brilliant.
Phil, do we sign you up?
Well, I like the seated bit. That grabs me. The wheelchair yoga. I must admit, it's never been something that I've wanted to do, yoga, and that's not. I don't know why that is, but
You were a hippie, though, in the 60s, weren't you?
yeah, but we didn't do yoga then. We did stuff I shan't talk about online.
Free love. Was it all free love?
Lots of free love. I never saw any of that, but I mean that was going on all around me. And
I
various
love a
other
bit of
things.
yoga myself.
Well, I know you've been, and I know it's, and I have no doubt that it's good for people. No question about that. And in this day and age, particularly at this moment in time, anything that people find to help, give them some strength and comfort has got to be a good thing.
Well, if you fancy joining in, Phil, it's on every Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday at 3 p.m. UK time.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to draw this to a close, but we'll make sure that goes online so people know where to look at. Yeah. Jeff, what can we say? As always, it's a delight. But at least this week we've got some positive stories too, which is very lifting.
Have a great week.
Yeah, take it steady, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye.
Our next guest, we are falling over ourselves with excitement, is Judy Heumann. Hi there, Judy.
Morning, everybody, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you are.
If you don't know, you should know. Judy is an American disability rights activist and seen as a world leader in the disability community. Since the 1970s, she's worked to develop human rights legislation and policies benefiting children and adults with disabilities. She's worked at the World Bank and the State Department, and has extended the international reach of the independent living movement. Now, we've got her on today as now she's a film star, she's an author. Both Phil and I have met you, but I suppose we're going back, that Crip Camp documentary, early 70s. What was it like then?
So thanks very much, guys. I'm really happy to be on this program. So I think we're probably in a similar age range. I'm 72. And in the United States in the late 1940s and 50s and 60s, there was no federal or national legislation that protected the rights of disabled individuals. I believe that's true in Great Britain as well as the United States and really most countries around the world. And so we really were, I would say, coming out of a cocoon, one that everyone didn't necessarily get out of. And I really attribute a lot of the advocacy work that had resulted over those years to television, because television was coming into people's homes in the 50s and 60s. And it was the first time that you could really learn about what was going on in the United States with other political movements, in particular, the civil rights movement that was really addressing the issues of oppression against Black and other people of color, but particularly Black people in the South and the North. We were learning about not only what discrimination was, the depth of the discrimination and hatred, but we were also learning about how people were organizing and how people were beginning to come together. We had many different, very critical activities that went on, a bombing of a church where young girls were killed, a woman named Rosa Parks, who was an African-American Black woman who in the South sat on a bus towards the front when the law said that she had to sit in the back, and she refused to get off the bus, and that resulted in a big boycott that resulted in the buses being integrated. And the March in Washington, Dr. Martin Luther King, his amazing orations that really were inspiring to people around the world. So we were, even though at that point, we were young teenagers, were really beginning to, at least for me, and I know this is true for others, beginning to really think about actions that had been taken against us that did not allow us to be on a track towards equality. So I have two brothers. They went to school when they were 5 years old. I didn't get to go to school till I was 9 years old. So I had a teacher coming when I lived in Brooklyn, New York, who came to the house 2 times a week, once for an hour, once for an hour and a half. You know, as you get older, you begin to recognize that if you're not able to go to school, which I wasn't because the principal said I could be a fire hazard, he wouldn't let me go into that school, even though at that time, because people weren't looking at this as a rights-based issue, my mother took me to school to try to register me. There were steps. She didn't even think about talking about a ramp or accessibility. She didn't think about asking anybody if they'd be able to help me go to the bathroom or anything like that. So really, I think camp for disabled children, which those camps existed only because the camps for like my brothers, non-disabled kids, didn't accept kids with most types of disabilities.
And this is the Camp Gen Ed that is part of the documentary, and you're already by then you're a counsellor of some sort?
Well, so I need to put in context camps. So camps in the United States have always been a big deal for some families. So I started going to camp when I was 9. When I went to Camp Jeanette, I was like 12 or 13, and when I worked at Jeanette, I was 21. I had originally gone to a camp named Oakhurst, and I have friends who went to many other camps. I think Jeanette clearly was an exemplary camp for the reasons that you see in the film, but I have other disabled friends who went to other camps and had similar experiences. And those experiences significantly were around the fact that we were able, as disabled individuals who were young, teenagers, younger, and then teenagers, to really begin to start talking about issues that were of concern to us that we couldn't necessarily speak to our parents about or our brothers or sisters. Not because they were bad people, but because they were experiencing things in a different way. And I always went to camp for at least 3 weeks. And when I went to Camp Jeanette, I went for 4 weeks and 8 weeks. So you really had an opportunity to form many different kinds of bonds. Your first kiss, your dating, girlfriend, boyfriend, breaking up, getting back together, you know, dances, all kinds of things like that. But we were also really beginning to think about our futures. And whereas on the one hand, numbers of us were kids from immigrant families who were Jewish or other backgrounds, and there was a great deal of loyalty to the United States for what it had done allowing immigrants in and giving people opportunity. So when I was able to begin to talk with friends about, well, college, jobs, what kinds of jobs, realizing we didn't really have adult role models. I mean, for those of us who had polio or other disabilities, you know, Franklin Roosevelt loomed out there, although there was always this mixed message of people not necessarily knowing he had polio. So what existed then was the beginning of a movement, and it was a movement that was significantly with civilians. And the reason I discuss the issue of civilians, and you know this from your days and still today, disabled veterans get better services than civilians with the same disabilities. And when World War II was over, many of those men and women who came home with more significant disabilities were beginning to have organizations that were formed, and in many cases formed with federal government support, and they were beginning to look at issues around accessibility. Some of us began to work with them when we were in college. But this issue of formulating who we were, what we believed we wanted to be able to do, what barriers we saw, how we began to think about what can we do to not only object and complain, but what can we do constructively to remedy these problems. So none of this came about overnight, but that's where we were in the 50s, 60s. And then I think when we got into the 70s, we were learning also from the Vietnam War and other things.
Judy, can I just ask, at Camp Jened, were the people you hang out with there, were they from all over the US, or were they
No.
from No,
No.
right. Because otherwise, liaising with them later on would have been much more difficult, presumably.
Most of the people who were at Jeanette were from New York.
Right.
The camps in New York, not exclusively. You know, there was a guy from Massachusetts, but most of them were from the state that the camps were in. And there were
Okay.
camps in every state, you know, various kinds of camps.
You can see in the filming the cogs are turning in people's heads, and it's fabulous to see how they're starting to expand. There's little moments where there's the guy who can't hold his own cigarette and someone's holding it for him, and so they smoke. There's the three guys who are playing ball, but their impairments would stop them playing ball normally, but no, not now. But one of the bits I was really struck, and this is clearly intrinsic to you, was the inclusion. So everybody must get a chance to talk. Everybody's voice must be heard. I think there's a lady, Nancy Rosenblum or Blum.
Rosenblum.
Really hard to understand, but the interviewer lets her finish and then says, anyone interpret? And this presumed, I worry we've lost a little bit of that. That is integral to you, that everyone must be part of this.
So I think you also need to understand a little more of the backstory in the film. So Neil Jacobson, Stevie Hoffman, Nancy Rosenblum, and myself, we went to the same segregated elementary school classes.
Okay.
Right.
So we went to camp and we weren't meeting each other for the first time. So as you can see, Stevie also had a speech disability. I would say that Stevie had way more opportunities than Nancy did. Stevie went to high school. I went to high school. Neil went to high school. My mom and their moms and other moms had fought with the Board of Education because at that time, for those of us who used wheelchairs, you would stay in elementary school till you were 21 years old and then go to sheltered workshops, or you would go back onto home instruction and have your teaching at home. So my mom and other moms organized to get the Board of Education to make some schools accessible in each one of the 5 boroughs in New York City. And Stevie and Neil and myself went to high schools. Nancy stayed a friend, and I moved out to Berkeley. Stevie moved out to Berkeley. Neil moved out to Berkeley. And Nancy eventually moved out to Berkeley. Unfortunately, she died, I believe it was in the 1980s, as you could see in the film. But, she was a wonderful woman. And because we knew her, we saw her every day, and we knew who she was and about her thoughts. So it would have been something that we would never have contemplated not to include her, because she was our friend.
I think there was something also that amused me, and I know that you and I share the same impairment, so that's why it amused me.
I don't use the word impairment. I hate the word impairment.
Okay. Well, like you, I had polio.
am not impaired.
The moment in the film where there's this moment where the polios are at the top of the pile and the cerebral palsies are at the bottom. I mean, that kind of hierarchy. And we know that for people with cerebral palsy, very often their speech is affected and it is difficult for them to express themselves with. But people like me and you with, we just talk for England or America or whatever. I mean, did that come across the sort of hierarchical thing that there was a dominant group, or was it really very, very open to everybody?
I think in some way it's how you feel as an individual person. So I would say that in the elementary school that I went to, from the 4th grade to the 8th grade, the school itself was a school for non-disabled children. Mm-hmm. There were classes, 5 or 6 classrooms in the basement where the special education classes were. There was a lunchroom. We weren't allowed to have lunch with the non-disabled kids. We ate lunch in our own rooms. Now, there was some activity, I don't know why it started, where some of the kids, we call them the kids upstairs, where some of the kids would be selected, I guess for good behavior, to come downstairs to the basement and help some of us be able to get to the assembly that happened about once a week. And the kids from upstairs would, as a rule, come over to assist people pushing their chairs who were more like they were, didn't have speech disabilities. So I would say that, yes, in situations like that, not just people who had polio, because people with muscular dystrophy or spina bifida or whatever, it wasn't polio. And really, by 1970s, there were no more new cases of polio, but there continued to be, people who had other kinds of physical disabilities without a speech involvement. So I think it really is very true that the more you look and sound like a typical person in a community, the more likely it is that you'll be at least initially accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think that, when you look at Neil and Denise, you hear, Denise talking about polios. It really does relate back to the fact that I had a boyfriend named John who had polio. And the summer I wasn't at camp, he started going out with Denise. And when he heard that I was coming back, he broke up with Denise. And so I think there was a little color around that. Yeah. But broadly speaking, I think definitely true. The more you look like somebody else, the more people look and sound.
Yeah.
The more it is that people, yeah.
I have two quick questions. It relates to that. Phil and I were consciously aware that we are an acceptable face of disability because we were male, and our impairments,
White,
our conditions, our disabilities. I'm getting the right language quickly.
Disability.
Thank you. Were maybe be more acceptable. There is a point in the film, and this is my greater question underneath is, did you realize you were being thrust forward as a leader? There's a point in the film where I think you're speaking to a senator and you get emotional. And I got that in the sense of, oh my goodness, I'm representing everybody. This is stuff that really affects me. And my cheeky link question is, at the very beginning, you talk about someone saying, are you sick? And it knocked you. And I wonder whether can people still upset you that deeply?
So what was happening at that time was not so much that I was thinking about myself as a leader, although obviously I was one of the spokespersons at those hearings. There were congressmen that were holding this discussion, and the person shaking his head who I was speaking to or referring to was a staff person from the federal government. I think really I responded as I did because it felt to me like another platitude. Yes, 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 I understand. And the reality was that we as a group did not believe, and still today, I think many of us don't believe that people really get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was so blatant, with him shaking his head, and the fact that we were all tired. I think it was kind of a tipping point for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get that. That's an immense sense of frustration that I'd be overwhelmed. That second question I had, because I feel you're invincible, but just for us mere mortals, do you occasionally get someone who says something so deeply offensive, even if it's accidental? Do you still wobble, or can you swat it away now?
I try not to swat it away.
Okay.
So if something happens, I try to address it on the spot. It's just something that I found it kind of rises up within me. Now, some things are, something immediately happens. The way someone speaks to you, your denial of where you're going to sit. It can be anything from getting on the bus, and I sit backwards on the bus with my head facing the front of the bus. And I do that because there's a guy, I don't know if you know him, his name is Adolf Ratzka. He's a disabled activist in Sweden, and he studied in the United States. He had polio, and we're very good friends. I was in Sweden, and we were in his vehicle, and or somebody's vehicle, and he was driving backwards. And I said, why are you driving backwards? And he said, well, when you get on a plane, the flight attendants sit backwards. Why do you think they sit backwards? And of course, for me, that made complete sense because I don't have great balance. So when I'm sitting forward, if a vehicle stops short, I go forward and I can't get myself up. But if a vehicle stops short, and I'm leaning back, I'm okay. So one day I got on a bus and the driver said they weren't going to move the bus until I changed the way I was sitting. And, it became, okay, am I going to turn around or not? And I didn't, and I said, call your manager. I'm not turning around. So it can be like something small like that to something happening to somebody else to much bigger issues. I do attribute this to my Brooklyn upbringing. And it allows me to kind of get in touch with not stuffing my emotions.
Yeah. Moving on, Judy, you've clearly over the time recently been writing your book, the memoir. I mean, Cape Jenner is looking at a particular period of your life and what was going on then, but I'm guessing your memoir is a much more far-reaching kind of account of what you've been through, called Being Human, which is clever. What do you think are thinking back over your life and what you've seen and still see, sitting on buses the wrong way round as far as the driver's concerned and stuff, what do you think the challenges are now that remain for younger people than us? What are the things that confront, do you think, when you consider?
Well, if you would have asked me this question in December, my answer would be very different than today.
Yes, I understand.
Well, different than today. First of all, I think in the United States, quote unquote, the younger generation activists with disabilities define themselves as ADA generation. And the way they discuss it is really recognizing the fact that the ADA is a critically important piece of legislation, but it's their responsibility not only to help ensure that that law is being appropriately implemented, but to recognize that important piece of legislation, others that came before, is not the end of what we need to be fighting for.
Right.
So it's both new laws that we need and financing that we need and coalition development, expansion of our disability rights movement to really reflect the number of disabled people. In the US, we're talking about 56 million people. In the world, we're talking about at least 50%, 15% of the population and, at least 1 billion people. So I think more people are seeing and acting on. I think that's one very important thing that I'm seeing here and around the world is that younger disabled people are really recognizing this is not somebody else's job. And if you don't trust the older generation, you want to do it better. So get involved now because they're screwing it all up, right? So, but they did a good job, but they're too tired. So I think, one of the other important things that's happening is really intergenerational work. I think as people, feel more secure and in what they're trying to change, recognizing the importance of coalition. Now, I don't mean coalition just amongst disabled people, although that's really a critical need that people with various forms of disabilities are working together, but also the importance of having our movement be supportive of and be supported by the women's movement, the movement of people of color, different religious backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, that if we really want to be addressing the significant forms of discrimination that exist in our countries around the world, to the extent that we don't work together, then the perpetrators of injustice really continue to win.
Yeah.
Now today, with COVID-19 and the coronavirus pandemic, I am not only concerned about what is happening to people today who have disabilities, our ability to feel confident that we will get equivalent services to others, that our lives will be seen as being equally valuable. And, I think about Jane Campbell, Dame Campbell, Dame Campbell, who, as I've said to her,
to get the language right.
She's a baroness.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me.
That's all right.
Sorry, Jane. Sorry. Baroness. I knew her when she was just a low life like us.
A regular old. Yeah.
But now that she's a baroness, and of course that doesn't mean anything here, but nonetheless, I remember Roger, her husband, saying to me at one point when she had been very sick in the hospital that he needed to bring a picture of her into the hospital because people really didn't understand who she was. And when you're vulnerable and sick, you need people to understand who you are, not who you are at the moment in the bed. Well, obviously that's important, but you need to be able to look for a future, look for people being able to get back to where they were before. So clearly it's a very big concern. But over the next year and a half, as we move out of the pandemic, the impact on the economy is very significant. And in developing and middle income countries, it's going to be even worse. And while I believe we've been really making important steps forward as a result of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and laws within Europe and individual countries and states, etc., we still are in no way, shape, or form at a level where we can feel confident. First hired, first fired, the changing world of work, what it's going to look like. I think these are big issues that our movements really need to be focusing on simultaneously as we're working on issues of preservation of life, ensuring that personal assistance issues around pay and ability for people to get PPE and other things like that.
You said it, Phil's always said it. I like people who are a little bit older who are never threatened by the next generation. I think your bit about that unity, and I've spoken to a 23-year-old who watched Crip Camp, and she said, I cannot believe how included everybody felt. It was everyone was pulling together in the right way, and I think that's really critical. And I think Stevie says it, where if you're quiet or you're shy and you have a disability, you're screwed. And I think the work that you do, that Baroness Jane Campbell, Phil has done in his time, it is for the people who don't have that voice. This is going to benefit everybody because you can be the noisy rabble rousers.
So I really appreciate this, and I encourage that you look at Netflix for Crip Camp, and if you're interested in buying the book, you can do it on Amazon, and it's called Being Human, Heumann.
Yeah, we will make sure that all our listeners have the links to the book and the film. And I'd like to also say to you, Judy, how much it meant a lot to me to watch, and it reminded me of how things used to be, and some of the fun that could be had too, to be fair. The kissing behind the shed.
Of course.
But the other, I suppose, the positive, the one thing that's changed that maybe will make a big difference is the fact that we can communicate more than we ever used to be able to when we were young. The social media outlets now offer us huge potential to keep being heard, don't they? So, Judy, it's been
I want to say one thing, sorry.
Yeah, go.
Obviously, social media is important. I do want to underscore that I don't believe what happened to those of us who went to camps, to Camp Jeanette or other good camps, would have happened if we were just dealing through social media.
Sure.
There really was something about being able to spend 24 hours a day together for many weeks, which really created an environment of creativity.
We've debated that impact of social media compared to things like being in the room or direct action. I mean, you're out in the streets blocking traffic.
Very hard to ignore that.
Yes.
But Judy, we could do this for the next 2 hours, but we're not allowed to. You've got other things you've got to do too. But it's been a tremendous pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Maybe we can do this again in the future.
Thank you, Judy.
You're welcome.
We're getting towards the end of this week's Phil and Simon show. Phil and I wanted to have a little chat about the documentary on Netflix called Crip Camp, which features Judy Heumann and another chap called Jim Lebrecht, and just some amazing disabled people. What did you get from it, Phil? What did you think?
Well, you've used the word amazing, so I can't use that again. I found it very moving. It reminded me, because I'm that little bit older than you, so it kind of spoke to some of the things that I remember, although I have to say I didn't come across disability rights until 10, 15 years after that film was made. So, and I don't remember anything of its equivalents in the UK. I certainly didn't go to a Gen Ed. The name of the camp in the movie is Camp Gen Ed. I didn't go there, so that kind of thing. It was very powerful. And what, of course, we've just had the most fantastic conversation with Judy Heumann, and she emerges in the film as a spokesperson for the gang, so to speak, and of course went on to do some amazing things in terms of the civil rights movement, particularly in the US. But she's also been an incredibly important figure in the UK too, because I think what has to be remembered is that what was going on at Camp Gen Ed then, and as the movement progressed in America, the UK was busily watching this and beginning to think about its own struggles and so on. So, and if a really, really good, I mean, I would urge anybody to watch it, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's a standalone, good documentary produced by the Obamas and very well made. And I was about halfway through, and they just started to do some really strong campaigning, including blocking the streets in New York and basically shouting down a politician who was trying to argue with them, and they just blasted him until he got nowhere. And I had to text a friend. I kind of got excited. I was like, and there was two things. There's this whole thing about taking direct action that we don't seem to do very often now. But there was this second bit that I really am a big fan of, and I constantly want youngsters to have, which is pride. There was a pride in who they were. There was a, we're not ashamed. We're not going to apologize. This is the deal, and you need to change. We're not the problem. They talk about going to get ice cream, and the public stared at them and felt very uncomfortable with them. And I get that, and I know that. But you're like, damn you, we're not going to hide away. You need to change how you think.
Yeah, there was all of that. And there was some very, I mean, there were some very practical bits of the movie that made me think. For example, when they occupied the government buildings, these are some of the most severely disabled people. I mean, really profoundly disabled people who are now sleeping on the floor for 21 or 20 however many nights. And they're not eating food. Several of them go on hunger strike and stuff. And I just think physically how that must have been so difficult to do.
Well, and add on, FBI turned off all the telephones. So what do? They started using sign language out of the windows to get their messages out. So cool. Then they ran out of food, but the Black Panthers, who were a very strong political group then, started bringing in food. And they said, why are you doing this for us? You know, why are you doing it? And the Panthers saying, you are trying to make a better world for everybody. We support people who do that.
Yeah.
Oh.
That was one of the most important things. And I think when we were talking to Judy earlier, she made the point very powerfully that this isn't just about disabled people. It's about women. It's about people of color. It's all of that stuff, gay rights. And I guess one of the things that she was suggesting, and I think the film talks about, is how you make alliances with other organizations and learn from them and adapt your strategies to do things that work. It's an excellent film. I mean, really good movie.
To do that, you need the strong leadership who can sort of cross boundaries, and that's what the Judys and the Janes and the others we know. Do you remember in the documentary they go to a well, I don't even want to call it a care home. It's a place called Willowbrook, and it's an institution with people with, again, profound learning disabilities. It makes, I can feel myself getting upset now. I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble. It reminded me of a concentration camp.
Exactly.
Looking at the bodies, they're lying around in their own feces. They're not being fed.
Yeah. And this was the 1970s, remember?
In the United States.
Yeah, in the United States. And we saw pictures like that coming out of Europe when these Romanian orphanages with...
Yeah.
You remember those images? I certainly remember them. I don't know if our listeners will, but that was horrific. It was a really powerful reminder of what the struggle is actually about.
Yeah.
If it's really about, you know, confining disabled people to these institutions and letting them rot there, then we're in a really bad place.
Well, it's the other end of the scale of we go for ice cream and upset people. And that what they want is to be shut away. And you're like, damn it, no way. The media, so the media locally were following it around San Francisco, in Berkeley. And there's a lovely line, one of the media people say, and the building is an occupation by an army of cripples. And it really made me laugh. Now, there always needs to be, I think, a bit of luck. It's a bit like if you're a football team and you win, you need a bit of luck. If something to happen. In the documentary, they talk about the technicians who went on strike, so they were lacking news stories, and suddenly their protest went nationwide, and suddenly the politicians start tumbling down.
What was significant was, of course, they formed a good relationship with this particular reporter who wasn't disabled. They had got no traction whatsoever with the governor or with President Carter, who was then president. And when that story hit all the main news feeds, it was very obvious that very quickly the governor and the president began to take much more interest. I think too, what was lovely was that reporter was kind of now embedded with the group. We keep hearing, don't we, about I'm embedded with the troops in Afghanistan or whatever. He was embedded with the disability group. But it was important because he was telling the story, as was the guy making the movie telling the story. But this was a news feed.
It was a very smart thing to do. I think as disabled people, we're very cautious of media and news media and how they represent us.
Yeah.
And that was a gamble even then, but they somehow got it right. There's a line in, they talk about it, if not now, when? As in, we can't give up. There was another line. I didn't get my head around it. There's a phrase they use, separate but equal, and they rejected it.
Yes.
What did you get from that as a phrase?
Well, it linked to this idea that they had education for disabled kids and they had education for non-disabled kids, but the education was equal, except because it isn't. So it was something linked to that. It was this idea that they were treating us fairly because they were treating us separately, but actually that's not what we want. It's a bit like the Rosa Parks thing about being on the bus. She's on the bus, but she's only told where she can sit. That's not equal. That's not being treated fairly, is it?
An American who I saw last year said to me, Rosa Parks would have still got to the destination, but that wasn't the point. So that's exactly it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, there's that lovely bit there. Half of them are hippies. There's clearly a bit of free love. There's a little bit of rock and roll going on. and the idea that they go around every night and try and convince people to stay and occupy this building, and knowing that people, like you said, half of us wouldn't be able to say that because we'd have died these days. But then they just went for it. It's remarkable.
To knowingly put yourself in that situation, knowing that it, and the hunger strike bit, for example, knowing that this may well kill you, is an appropriate use of the word courage. Because, I mean, they were under enormous pressure from all sides. You mentioned the FBI, for example, but they were under pressure from all sides. And they were under pressure from their conditions. The fact that they were getting more and more ill, I'm guessing, as a result of the actions they took. But they had a higher cause, didn't they? It was more about the collective, not themselves as individuals.
Well, and also, if you whittle it down to their single issue at that point, it was a 504. Americans obviously used the name of these, and it was a piece of legislation that said, if you have government money, you must be accessible.
Yeah.
And they got it in, but no one was taking any notice of it and trying to withdraw it. So if you're a young disabled person now, what that was schools, hospitals, government buildings, local authority buildings, buses, all this, none of them had to be accessible. And they weren't being accessible. This was real basic stuff on public money.
And even if it had been enforced, it only affected federal buildings. It didn't affect all the other buildings. And do you know what this reminds me of?
Tell me, Phil, I'm getting angry.
Oh, it reminds me, Mr.
Tell me.
of the public sector duty that was part of our own act, and our own legislation came in later, if you recall, that was never really enforced. It was paid lip service to. And I think what the Crip Camp and the 504 stuff was about was saying it's not enough to have legislation. You've got to enforce it and you've got to implement it, and so on and so forth.
And with that brought to today, we have government briefings every day without a sign language interpreter.
How is that possible? I've been tweeting about that.
I know.
The fact is that the Scottish and the Welsh Assembly are using sign language interpreter. I haven't seen stuff out of Northern Ireland, but the United Kingdom, how is it not possible for us to provide sign language support for those briefings? It's absolutely bloody terrible, pardon my French.
I think we need to do a demo, Mr. Friend.
I'm out there. Oh, yes.
Are you allowed out?
When do you want to go?
Well, we've got to wait till lockdown's over, though, because you're not allowed out.
And I can't drive. So.
Yeah. So just keep tweeting. We've sorted that one out, haven't we?
Oh, God, we've sorted that already.
Just to say, I did talk about this on BBC Outs, the other show, and with Charlie Swinburne, because there is legal pressure being put on the government on this one. So
it should be necessary, should it? It should be. It's so important that everybody knows what the messages are.
I kind of want to go back 30, 40 years. Oh, one last bit. There's a chap called Ed Roberts who, if he was alive today, would be sitting next to Judy. And I know him through Berkeley, and there's a building called the Ed Roberts Campus, which is the most accessible building in the world. He was doing amazing stuff around this time. You mentioned it. Quite a few people who you see at the camp at late teens, early 20s, and then they die.
Yeah. I was particularly struck by that. I at the very end of the documentary, they show that, put the names to the main protagonists in the film, and their death date, and they were very young. Many of them were very, very young. Their impairments were so severe in some cases, I'm guessing. I don't know what caused their deaths, but it was very sad to think that big part of that whole movement died before they saw the ADA come in. In fact, I noticed that several of them died before the actual act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was passed. There's something, and that always makes me think, when people tell us to wait, people are dying who haven't got time. Do you know what I mean? We should be doing stuff far more urgently around disability. You've got a terminal condition, you don't want to wait, do you?
You're making me get emotional, and maybe this show, rather than dedicated to those people who are alive, who are doing amazing work, which we love to bits, it should be dedicated to those who have done all that work and aren't alive anymore. And we have those people in the UK as well as the US, around the world. And without them, these conversations,
we wouldn't be doing this. No question about that.
Oh, non-contact hug.
Yes, all right.
Well, let's stop. Watch Crip Camp. Get Netflix. Send them your password, Phil.
And don't forget to get Judy Heumann's book.
Yeah.
It's called Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist. So that's what it is.
Absolutely. Read it, watch it, do get in contact. We have had quite a few. Donna wrote to me to say thank you through Facebook. Jane Campbell is saying what we're doing is very important, which is amazing. Alice Maynard got in touch with you.
She did, and she thought the show was great. She liked the new format, thought it was excellent, and we're obviously working on how we're going to do things over the next coming weeks.
Louise Clifford said she really enjoyed that last show where we had Dr. Francis Dockery and Alan McKillop, our friend at the BBC. Definitely worth a listen. We are storming it. So if you want to contact us, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or
our Gmail address, which is the Phil and Simon Show @gmail.com.
That's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.